In this video, we'll take a look at creating a portrait sketch with acrylics. Now this is a fairly small painting. I'm working on 10" by 8" stretched canvas. I've already lightly sketched out the contours of the subject using a medium grade graphite pencil. I'll begin by establishing the darker locations within the picture plane. I'm using a mixture of phthalo green, pyrrole red, and just a bit of Payne's gray to make the value a bit darker. I want these colors to have a little bit of a green tendency to them. This will contrast a bit more with the warmer and redder skin tones that we'll add in just a moment. Now that I've loosely established some of the areas of shadow, we can go ahead and start applying some of the flesh tones. Now, this color is mixed by using pyrrole red, titanium white, and Hansa yellow. There is just a touch of burnt umber in that mixture as well. Now, throughout the painting, I'll use various combinations of these colors. For example, if I want the color to be a little bit more orange, I may use a little bit more of the Hansa yellow and a little bit more of the pyrrole red. If I want the color to be a little bit lighter, of course, I'll add a bit more titanium white. And if I want it to be a little bit darker or a little bit warmer, I'll add a little bit more of the burnt umber. Now I'm blocking in these initial applications with a larger brush. As we work throughout the painting, we get to areas that are more detailed. I'll switch to a smaller brush, but I'm only going to be using a bright or a flat brush throughout this painting. So I'm not going to be using a round brush. I want the brush strokes to be very strong in this painting and very clear and evident. In fact, I want the brush strokes to be an important element within the painting. That's why I'm going to put a lot of focus on allowing those brush strokes to be visible. Now, as you can see, at this point, I've started to push some of the more orange tones and some of the yellower tones that are happening in the skin. And I'm just going to continue with this, applying colors as I see them. And maybe there's a little bit of experimentation that goes along with this as well. I think a lot of beginning artists feel like you've got to have the perfect color before you go to the surface. And I really kind of disagree with that. I feel like there should be a lot of experimentation throughout the painting process. Take chances, use colors that may not seem like they make sense, and see what they look like on the surface. Now that we've got some of our initial skin tones on the surface, we've still got a lot of work to do on this. We can go ahead and start to establish some of the colors in the eyes. Of course, this is an important element within the piece. And I'm just going to start with a bit of phthalo blue that's been mixed with just a touch of titanium white. And then I'll go back and make that a bit darker with the phthalo blue mixed with Payne's gray. On top of this, we can go back and add some of the highlights that happen in here. Of course, the pupil should be really dark. I'm not using black at all, though, to create the darker values in the pupil. Instead, this is a mixture, again, of Payne's gray and phthalo blue. And then we'll just apply some of those highlights right on top of the areas of the pupil and the iris. Now for the whites of the eyes, which are not really white at all, I've added just a touch of Hansa yellow to the titanium white to make a more natural looking area or a more natural looking color for these locations. Now, there's all kinds of wrinkles and things that happen around the eyes, so I'm just going to use a variety of different skin tones. Again, this skin tone is mixed using Hansa yellow, titanium white, pyrrole red, and just a bit of burnt umber to make the color a little bit darker and a little bit warmer. So you can use a variety of different concentrations of these colors to produce all of the different skin tones that happen within the face. You know, some of these are going to be a little bit darker, some of them are going to be a little bit lighter, some of them are going to be lean a little bit to the browner side, so you'd use more burnt umber. Some of them are going to lean a little bit further to being a little bit more yellow, so you'd use a little bit more Hansa yellow. And you know, there's no real rules as far as what colors you should use, but I've always found that a good mixture of yellow, red, white, and brown typically makes a pretty good skin tone. Now, as you can see, I'm not just creating a big, vast area of one tone. Instead, I'm concentrating on building up the relationships between the different values and the different skin tones that happen on a face. A lot of times people ask, how do you mix a skin tone? Well, there's no real true answer to that because there's so much variety in the human face that you're going to be mixing lots of skin tones using various combinations of those colors. Now, there are a couple locations where I've got some magenta that's starting to show up, and I like to pop a few brushstrokes of magenta here and there. It makes the face feel a lot more natural, and of course, it adds a little bit more variety to the skin tone. We can see this on the nose and in a couple of areas around the eye. Now, I'm going to create just a little bit of a shadow under the eyelid on the right, and then we can continue working our way down the face here, and we'll start to develop some of the shadows on the nose. Now, in this area with the nose, you're going to see I'm going to go through a lot of different variations of that area, and that's just all part of the experimentation process. In my personal painting process, I'll put colors down and then evaluate how they look, maybe work in another area, and then go back and start to push the different values and the colors that happen in there until I arrive at a place where I'm happy with that particular section. So I'm going to start to lighten up some of these areas and create a little bit of a transition between some of the darker values and lighter values. And you'll see this area goes through quite a bit of reworking as I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want the colors and the color temperature to behave in these areas. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of a purple color. Now this is the Pyro Red mixed with the Phthalo Blue with a bit of white and just a touch of Payne's Gray. And this will create somewhat of a cooler shadow, but here again you'll see that this goes through several different stages until I arrive at a color temperature that I'm happy with. I'm also going to experiment a little bit with some of the shadows that happen on the face. You can see I cool it down here and then warm it right back up with a little bit more orange and brown in the mixture. I think it's important to understand that whenever you're creating a painting, uh, and you have the freedom to cover up what you've already put down. Now, of course, you don't have quite as much freedom when you're working with a medium like watercolor, but of course, this is acrylic. We can cover right over the top of an area that we've put color down. So I would encourage you to always experiment and, like I said before, try different colors and see what happens, see what works for you, and don't be afraid to be a bit bold and take chances. Now, earlier on, I mentioned that I wanted the brushstrokes to be an important element in the painting. You can use acrylics in a way that the brushstrokes are almost hard to find. In fact, if you start with an underpainting that's created in a monochromatic, perhaps gray, and layer colors on top of it in glazes, you can almost get to the point where you don't see any brushstrokes at all. With this painting, I'm taking an opposite approach. I want the brushstrokes to be very clear and very evident, so I'm trying to make more deliberate brushstrokes as I'm adding the colors, and I'm allowing them to sit there without much blending or transition areas. So at this point in the painting, it's a process of going back to your reference material, whether that's a subject that's sitting in front of you or whether that's a photo reference, finding bits of information as far as the color temperature and the color value go, mixing up that color on your palette, and then applying it to the surface. Don't overthink things as you go. Be a little bit bold as you're making your marks. And remember always, when you're using a medium like acrylic, we can go right over the top of what we've put down if we don't find it to be working with the painting. Now, since we're concentrating on allowing those brush strokes to be very strong and clear, I'm concentrating on creating shapes of colors and values that are observed from the subject as I apply them to the surface. So I'm trying to allow these brushstrokes to be very strong and pretty heavy with the application of the paint. Now I'm going to work on transitioning that area from the darkest darks on the left side of the face to the light values that happen. And since our subject is in strong light, that transition is going to happen very quickly. So it's a little bit tricky to create a transition zone that happens in between, but I'm finding here that a darker brown, almost an orange, is working to create a nice transition. Then over the top of the midtones that we've already established on the side of the face, I can go ahead and start creating some of the lighter values and highlights that happen. And as I do so, I'm leaving spaces in between, and these will create the illusion of subtle wrinkles that happen on the face. I'm also trying to keep the application fairly consistent. So I'm trying to allow my strokes to be very similar to the ones that I've made around the eyes and the nose. Since I'm working each section as I go, it would be very easy to create some inconsistencies in the application of the paint and the colors that are used. So I keep referring back to the areas that I've already addressed and maybe pull in additional colors. Like here, we'll pull in a little bit more of that magenta in areas just to keep some consistency and make sure that the piece is overall harmonized. We'll continue working down to the area just underneath the nose and right above the lips. Again, I'm going to create a lot of different colors in this section initially as I experiment and try to find the right color temperature and the right color values for this location. So I'm applying a bit of purple, and this is mixed with a little bit of Payne's Gray to make it a little bit more of a neutral purple. It still has the red and the blue, which is very clear in it, but it is neutralized just a bit. And I'll also work on that transition area just underneath the nose to find the right combination of colors to kind of create that transition and make it convincing. Now, I'll go back to what I mentioned before about experimenting. Since we have so much freedom with acrylic paint, whereas we can cover over areas that we've already applied colors if they're not working for the painting, experimentation is very important. It's almost like if you think of working with clay. If you have a big ball of clay, initially it's not anything, but the more you mold it, the more you work around with it, it slowly starts to form whatever you're creating. And of course, you can always change it while the clay is still wet. And the same is true for an acrylic painting. We can experiment and try different things out. And in the process, we're almost forming the painting just like we were with the clay ball, so to speak. So I'll continue to experiment with some of the colors and values that happen around the mouth. Some of these colors are a little bit cooler and some are a little bit warmer. And a lot of these are going to be covered up with highlights and shadows and other various applications of color as I go throughout the painting. What's important to note here is don't overthink what you're doing as you're applying the colors. Let it be intuitive. Find a color, mix it quickly, and then apply it to the surface. Of course, by applying additional colors over the top, you'll alter the color that's underneath, and in some areas, that color underneath will show through what you apply over the top, adding a bit more depth to the color. Now, this older fellow has a goatee, or it has a mustache and a beard. So we've applied a bit of titanium white initially, and then I've gone back with a little bit of Payne's Gray to create some of the shadowed areas. And I'll keep working that back and forth until I get to a place where I'm pretty happy with the texture of the beard. Again, we're allowing the brush strokes to be very clear and evident, and then a few final touches to the lips and the areas around the lips without being too descriptive. Again, we want the brush strokes to play an important role in the painting and be suggestive. Now we'll go back up to the area that we haven't addressed on the face yet, and this is the forehead. And again, I'm going to start by developing some of the wrinkles that are happening in this location with a darker brown. This is burnt umber with a bit of Payne's Gray mixed in. And then we'll use some of that orange color that we created earlier for a transition zone. Now that we've got a little bit more experience with handling the other locations of the face, we almost can come up with a methodology for applying colors in this location. So I'm creating that transition area of orange. I'm pulling in some of the magenta in areas to add a little bit of interest, allowing those brush strokes to be very strong. And then I can go back and start developing some of the midtones and highlights that happen to create the areas of subtle wrinkles that happen on the forehead. In the areas of midtone, and especially the areas of shadow, we're going to allow these midtones to be a little bit heavier with the red. And in the areas where the light is a little bit stronger, we're going to allow that skin tone to be a little bit heavier with the yellow. And then we'll apply some stronger highlights right on top of this. And this will give the illusion of a transition from lighter values to darker values. But really, again, these are just blocks of color, shapes of color, and their relationship with each other is what's creating that illusion. Now it's time to strengthen up the shadow, and I'm using a mixture of Payne's Gray and burnt umber. We're still using just a touch of the phthalo green in the mixture just to give it a green tint. And once this area is dry, I'm going to go back over the top with just an indication of some hair that's happening on the side that's barely visible in the area of shadow. And this, again, is with the Payne's Gray and just a touch of titanium white. We want these strokes to be very, very subtle in this location. We'll also apply another application of the darker value on the right side, and while we do so, we can clean up the edge of the face there with the flat side of the brush. Now for our final applications of highlight. Now this time the highlights are created with just a touch of phthalo blue mixed in with the white. Now this might seem a little bit strange, but strong highlights like this are a little bit cooler in color temperature. So there's just a very subtle touch of phthalo blue mixed in with this titanium white. And then we'll clean up the eyelid on the right side of the face. And now our acrylic portrait sketch is complete. If you're ready to learn more about acrylic painting, I suggest you check out the Acrylic Painting Academy. The Acrylic Painting Academy is a comprehensive painting course designed to guide absolute beginners to a level of producing professional quality acrylic paintings through concise and easy to digest modules that include high definition videos and ebooks. Designed for beginners, this course lays the foundation required for success with acrylics and painting in general. A wide variety of subjects and topics are covered in this course, including materials, surfaces, and tools, how to create the illusion of light and form in a painting, stretching canvas, direct and indirect painting, color theory, and color mixing are all covered. And we also cover a variety of different subject matter, including still life, landscape painting, as well as abstraction and non-objective painting. Now, I understand not everyone learns by watching videos, so downloadable ebooks are also included with each module to help you learn more efficiently. The course is over 4 hours of video instruction, and it also includes 14 ebooks. So if you're ready to learn more about acrylic painting, I suggest you take a look at the Acrylic Painting Academy.